us through getting started with Azure Cosmos DB SDK for TypeScript stroke JavaScript. Um, I would like to welcome you to Kenya Data Platform. This is a user group where you get to find Microsoft MVPs like I and Kemboy and Gold student ambassadors like Dennis and I, Tricia, Brian, and a lot other guys who will be presenting on some topics to do with Microsoft technologies, software engineering in general, and sometimes even things to do with AI, DevOps, name it. A lot of things we do in our user group. So welcome, and please feel free to ask any question. You can raise up your hand. There's a button. I think it's on my right hand side, known as raise. You can raise up in case you have a question, or if you would like to type it on the chat box is open for you guys to ask any type of question where you need clarification. In case you need some resources on a certain topic, feel free to just throw that question on the chat so that I can hook you in with the required resources. So enough with that. So today we shall be digging deep with TypeScript. As I have said, Dennis will be taking us through Azure Cosmos DB SDK for JavaScript. So, in case you are new to Azure Cosmos DB, I'm going to share some few blogs on the chat. You can click and go and read more. They are blogs we have written with I and most of the community members or leads in this user group. So feel free to go and read more from those blogs. So today Dennis will be taking us through this SDK and see how we can consume Azure Cosmos DB, the best database in the world. In case you don't know, it's powering things like ChatGPT, Microsoft Teams, and a lot of apps which are famous out there. So Dennis will be showing us a simple example how to kind of work with a create, read, update, and delete situation. It's just purely TypeScript. And in future, probably next week, we shall be diving into frameworks. So things like Express. Dennis will take us through Express to see how you can use Express with Cosmos DB, but still we'll be using the Azure Cosmos DB SDK to connect to the database. And the week after, I'll be taking you through a more advanced approach to do that with a framework known as Nest.js, which is a backend framework. So without further ado, I think I'm going to invite Dennis Washira to take on from there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin, for that great introduction. If you can hear me and see my screen, a thumbs up, please.
It's loading on my end, but I think some people can see it.
Okay.
So it's actually on. Go on.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome again. My name is Dennis Washira. I'm a computer science student from Kirinyaga University. And welcome to Kenya Data Platform user group. We are continuing with our TypeScript 101 series. And today it's an interesting session to go around. We will now be interacting with a database, which is Microsoft Azure Cosmos DB, and see how we can play around, do a current operation with just purely TypeScript without any framework or anything. So just the Cosmos DB SDK and TypeScript. So for people who are joining for the first time, these are my socials. You can follow me on LinkedIn and X. Dennis, if you click those links, they are clickable, so they just direct you to my social. And all the recordings, you shall get them on my YouTube channel, which is Code with Dennis. And as always, our tradition, we always ask our after this, to follow our code of conduct, which is treat everyone with respect and kindness and empathy, and also respect and use inclusive language, and also constructive feedback makes everyone better. So create an environment where everyone feels comfortable to ask any question or to give any feedback. And as I said, this is event number 10, and it's getting started with Cosmos DB and TypeScript. And just a little bit introduction on what is Cosmos DB. It is a fully managed, distributed NoSQL database, which is fully managed by Microsoft. And the good thing with Azure, it's globally distributed. So anywhere in on Earth, you can be able to access Azure as long as you have internet connection. The other one is about it offers multi-modal support. So it excuse me. So it supports document databases, graph databases, table storage, and searching. And the other one is fully managed and serverless and scales automatically. So you don't need to worry about when your application is using Azure Cosmos DB. It scales automatically depending on the specification you have added on when provisioning that service. And it is fast and high availability applications. So as Kevin said, most of our crucial systems applications today, like ChatGPT, runs on Cosmos DB. And some big questions. Why Azure Cosmos DB? So as we said, it's fully managed service. So you focus on your building your application and you let the Microsoft handle the rest. The other one is no schema. So you don't need to worry about the schema. So no SQL, no schemas, no problem. Then issues about the indexing data. So it's one of the most common databases faces to when indexing data, so that to have an easier way querying that data, Microsoft handles that. And that's why no index management, you just need to deploy the database and connect to it. Multimodal, so it helps you cover the variety of databases by providing the APIs to interact with them. And finally, it's global distribution. So Azure is in more than 60 regions and more than 140 countries around the world. When I say about multimodal, it supports various other databases. So we have Azure Cosmos DB for Mongo API. We have Cassandra API. We have Gremlin. So Gremlin is a graph API database. Then Cassandra, it is for just a minute. Mongo, it's a document-based database where it's a NoSQL database. As you can see here, we have these several APIs. We have the NoSQL or NoSQL. We have MongoDB. We have Azure Tables. We have Cassandra. We have Gremlin. So NoSQL and MongoDB, they support corrections. So then we have Azure and Cassandra. They support table, which is the relational database. Then Gremlin can support graph database. So on items to store on NoSQL or Mongo, they are document-based data, so which mostly JSON data. Then Azure Tables and Cassandra, so they enumerate how the normal databases work, the relation database, where you have rows, tables, rows, and columns. Then on graph, Gremlin, we use node and edges. And with that, let's see how Azure Cosmos DB architecture looks like. So these are how data Azure Cosmos DB architecture looks, we have the first thing to create is a database account. So it is the top level resource that determines the public name and the API to access. So you'll be able to see this on Azure. Then after creating the database account, you need to create the database. So the database, these are just namespaces for your containers, and also they are used to manage the permissions like read, write, such kind of permissions. Then after databases, we have the containers. So containers are the collections or corrections. So similar to what you can say if it's a relation database, something to do with tables. So containers is the same thing as tables on relation databases. So your API choice will manifest various forms of our container. That is, if you choose a relation database, you'll be working with tables. If you choose an SQL or non-relation database, you'll be working with corrections. If you choose a graph or Gremlin database, your container will be working with a graph. Then after graph, we have the item. So the item is now the atomic data structure of a container. So that is maybe it could be a document, a row, a node, or edge. So that's how database Cosmos DB architecture works. And anytime we want to deploy a database in Azure, this is the procedure you follow. First, you need a database account, then database. Then after that, you need the container. So the container, it depends with the type of database you have deployed. If it's SQL, it's tables. If it's an SQL, there are corrections. Then if it's Gremlin, it's graph. We have three main ways of accessing database on the Cosmos database. And the first one is a data explorer. So this is the graphical data utility built straight in the Azure portal. So mostly when you create the database on Azure, you're probably accessing it through the Data Explorer. We'll be able to see that. Then we have the SDK, so for various languages to consume this Azure Cosmos DB. So the SDK stand for Software and Development Kit. So we have various SDK. We have the SDK for .NET. We have SDK for Java, the Spring Data, Node, Python, and Go. So these are commonly known language. So each language has its own SDK that you are able to consume and be able to access the Azure Cosmos DB. And our today's main focus is the last one, which is a REST API, where we manage data using an HTTP request. So our today's focus will be using REST API URL to access the Azure Cosmos DB database. Then you kind of asking yourself what is a Cosmos DB SDK. So SDK is a software development kit, and Cosmos DB has its own SDK, which is known as Cosmos DB SDK software development kit, and the SDK name is at Azure Cosmos, and it is the official TypeScript JavaScript library provided by Azure that allows developer to interact with Azure Cosmos DB grammatically. So this is the right tool to, as a developer, mostly TypeScript and JavaScript developers, to use this Cosmos DB SDK to access the database programmatically. And it is used for various reasons. It's used for connecting, querying, managing the Cosmos DB from a node stroke TypeScript application. So today we do the connecting. So we'll be able to use the SDK to connect. We query we read data from the database, post data to that database and sort of. So it supports various uh, options. The first one is creating, reading, updating, deleting. So in short, these are current operations. We have the containers, we have the documents. And also it helps you to run like SQL like queries on a JSON data. So the NoSQL database, it stores data in a document texture. So it will help you to write kind of SQL queries on JSON data. Most of you know like the SQL language is used for relational database, but the SDK will help you to write such kind of SQL queries on JSON data. And it is used for performance with server-side paginations and indexing. And a simple example of how you connect to Cosmos DB with the Azure Cosmos DB SDK. You need to install some various, you need to install the SDK, and we're saying the SDK name is at Azure/Cosmos. So you need to make sure the correct name is at Azure/Cosmos, and maybe the .env file to store your credentials. So you don't want to expose your REST API and also the API keys for connecting to your database. So this is an example of a connection instance where we import the Azure Cosmos SDK, and we use the class Cosmos client. Then on our file, which is config, we are getting the connection string, the database name, and the container name. Then we are creating a new connection from our Cosmos client class. Then you are passing the connection string. Then if we connect to that, we'll be able to get now a database through this client database. Then under that database, we shall be able to get now the container. So this architecture is what I discussed here. So this architecture here, you first of all access the database account. Then you access the database. Then you access the container. Then you can be able now to query the items on that container. So this is what this example is doing here. We are trying to instantiate a new connection using the new Cosmos client class. Then we get the database, we pass the database name, then the container, we pass the container name. Then we have an async function where to check the connection, we pass our params there, and we await the database and the read function to make sure like we get the information of our database. And with that, we can now jump into VS Code and also Cosmos Azure to provision the service and be able to use it. So up to that, let me know if you have any question before we go to Azure and try to provision a Cosmos DB database. Any question up to there? So most of you, I know we showed you how to claim Azure credit using your school email. If you don't have school email, if you're unable to verify, you can try Cosmos DB for free. So if you over to Cosmos DB, I think it's a Cosmos DB. We have the free option to try the Azure Cosmos. You don't have a school email to validate that. So if you go to this domain, which is cosmos.azure.com and try, you'll be able to sign in with your personal email and be able to test these or utilize these databases for free without the charging. So for me, I have some subscription, so I want to log into my account. So Azure portal. So if I over to Azure portal, and the first thing we said, we need to create a database account. So the database account is the top level of service you provision before going to database and containers. So under this, there are various ways you can search through. So you can use this tab or come here and just search for Cosmos DB. This Cosmos DB. You can see I have one account here, so I want to create another one to just showcase, to show you how you create one. So today I want to focus with just the default Cosmos DB for NoSQL, which is the native API for working with document, and it supports fast, flexible development with familiar SQL query language. So let me create the account as fast as possible. The workload, so this is just for running purposes. So let me choose running purposes. I choose my subscription there. Then I don't want to create a new resource group. I just want to use a resource group I had created earlier, which is TypeScript101 resource group. Then the account name. So this is the account name now, which we'll be using to access the database that will be creating on this, the database you are creating. So I can call it maybe TypeScript series dash NoSQL, maybe account one. Let me see whether the name will be, it must be unique name across your Azure account. You can see it's available, so that's nice. I don't want some availability zone, so just for demo purposes, I will leave the rest of configurations as default, but the most important is the account name, the resource group, and also the purpose of your database, so that we say it's fully managed. So if you select production, it will be able to scale whenever your application is scaling up. So let me create now the account just fast as possible. I hope it won't take much of our time. As that has been, okay, validation is good. Then let's create the database account. If you have any question, just make sure to drop the question on the chat. We have a great team on our call. You'll be able to answer your questions, or you can raise your hand. Is that? So as the database is being, the account is being provisioned, the other one, we need now to have also a TypeScript project. So let me also create a TypeScript project as fast as possible. I'm creating a new folder on my desktop. So a new folder here, new folder, maybe Cosmos DB demo. And then let me open it with a VS Code. Open with VS Code. So I want to create a clean version of projects. I don't want to use the one we started with, just in case for the attendees who might be the first time attending our session. So once we the account is being provisioned. So once you open your folder with the VS Code. So this is an empty folder I have opened with the VS Code, and I just want to create now a TypeScript project. And we do this in a simple way. So I want to have a package JSON. And how do you do this? You just do pnpm init. You have a package JSON there to manage your dependencies. Then once that done, I want to install some libraries. So we want to install the TypeScript, the TSX, so that we can have the watch mode and also the .env library. So pnpm and so the first dependency I want, it's this here. So I want the .env file. So let me install that. Let's see whether our account was provisioned successfully. Yeah. So we can now go to the resource. So with this now, we have created our Cosmos DB account. And for instance, we said we have 3 ways of accessing our database. So we can use the Data Explorer, we can use the SDK, or the REST API endpoint. So for now, I hand over to this Data Explorer. We can create the database and the container from the Data Explorer. Then we'll be able to use the REST endpoint to access the database. So once we are in this Data Explorer, you'll be able to see this now, the new this button here. And the first thing you need to create is database. You cannot create a container before creating a database. That's why even if you try to create a container, it will start by asking you the database ID of the database you want to use. So for this, we need now to create a new database. So let me click the new database, then the database name. So what can we call this database? Maybe it can be what? E-commerce database. So e-commerce DB. Then throughput, the provision throughput at the database level will be shared across. So for now, I'm just giving as the default settings of any service we are deploying. So I've created the database. Now, after creating the database, you need now the container. So the container, we say it's like a table in a SQL database. So with this now, we have our database. So let me now create a container. So a container, it's just like a table. So I want to use now the existing database, which is now this. If you cover this, you'll be able to see the database we have created, this e-commerce database. Then whatever you are creating here, the container ID. So the container ID is the name of your container. The container, maybe you want to create a container for users. So let me use users. Then after that, the partition key. So the partition key, it's like a unique key, the way you want your data to be uniquely stored in your Azure. So user ID, it's what I want to be my partition key, the user ID. Then with that, container throughput, auto scale, throughput, maximum request, the service, it's 1000. Let me just leave the rest as default, and let me create this container users. Okay. That being the provision, let's go back to our VS Code and install the rest of dependencies or libraries we'll be using. I want some dev dependencies. We say TSX is a dev dependency, and I want to install it. So pnpm, then to install a dev dependency, you need to use this fragment to indicate this a dev dependency, and TSX, and another library for types for node. So add types /node. Those two are dev dependencies. It might get they might take like a minute to install the dependencies. And we said, so we need now to install the Cosmos SDK also. And the way we install that, the same way, so it's pnpm, then it's not a dev dependency, so you don't need to include the dev fragment there. So pnpm and the Cosmos SDK now. So it's at Azure/Cosmos. So at Azure/Cosmos. With that, I think we are now ready to get started. Remember, this is a TypeScript project, so we need a TypeScript configuration file also. And with that, I can just create it here as fast as possible. I can just copy one from my previous project to fast track this. So I have a copy of TypeScript configuration. Just copy and paste it there. It has some default configuration, which is target ES6 2024, module node 16, root directory, SRC, module resolution, and others. So for now, also folder structuring matters a lot. So we need a source folder, which we have indicated here. So let me create a folder here, which is SRC. And inside our SRC, we create the new index file. So index dot ts. Once our libraries have been installed successfully, let me clear the console. With this now, we need also to run some script to run our project. And with this, it's so simple to run the script. So we want to have just a dev script. So I want to change this to dev. Then what I want to use is whatever you have installed, the TSX and the watch mode slash whatever the file we want to track, which is inside our source folder src slash index dot ts. So we don't need the build script or the start script because we are not deploying this to production. And with this, I think everything is good. We need to run the TSC to make sure like our code will be compiled with the new configuration we have here. So just run TSC and you'll be able to make sure our project is being compiled with the options we have indicated here. And after compiling, we'll be able to see a dist folder in our project once the project has been compiled successfully. Yeah, this is now the dist file. So that means now our project it's using this compiler option to transfer our code back to JavaScript. Then in our index to test whether our project is working, I can just console log just a message to make sure everything is working well. So console.log, just a message, welcome to TypeScript. Then let me run my project now, which is pnpm run dev. If everything is okay, we should get this message, which is welcome to TypeScript. Just a minute for the project to be yes. We are sure that our project is working well and everything is okay. We have installed all the dependencies. Excuse me. We have the Cosmos DB SDK or library. We have the .env. Then we have the dev dependencies for types and the TSX. With that now, we want now to connect or to under configuration to connect to our database, which is now Azure. You can see now we have this container here, the users. And under users, we don't have any user in our database. I don't want to add any user on the data explorer. We do this programmatically using the Cosmos DB SDK. So we have our database, we have our container. Then let's go back to our TS project and do some configuration so that you can be able to access that database. The first thing we need is a config file. So a config just file to make sure like we are separating our logic and the connection to have a well-structured project. So let me create a new file here. I can call it config .ts. So it's just a configuration file which I'll use to write my connection class or maybe the connection variables to connect to the database. Then with that, we need also our env file. So our env file is used to store some sensitive data like API key. So .env. Make sure it's on the root directory of your project. With that, so the first thing we need is on our .env, it's our Cosmos DB connection string. The first thing we need is the connection string from our Azure, which is now I will store it to this variable, which is Cosmos DB connection string. And where do you get this connection string? So you go back to the Cosmos DB, then you go over to this option here, which is keys. So under the account you created, which is TypeScript SQL account 1, then you go over to these keys. It load. We have the read, write key and read only key. So you want read only. So the read only, you only get data from or retrieve data from that database without any write option. So we want the read and write key, and we can use the primary key. So let me toggle that to see the connection string. So let me copy the connection string. This is the key. So I want the way you use this you want this connection string on your env. You need to have the Azure Cosmos DB endpoint and the key. So what I mean with that, we need this URL. So we said we want to access the database with REST API endpoint. So these are our REST API endpoint, where it just specify the name, the account name, and the document you are trying to access for that account. Then the API key, whatever it should be able to authenticate you to this account. So you want to copy this endpoint here. So there are two ways of accessing this endpoint. We have this, then the other one is the where. Let me confirm. But all the way, so you just need to copy this endpoint here, then come back to your account. So you need some extra information there. You need the account endpoint and the account key. So here I need some quotation marks. The first one is account key. So the whatever account endpoint. So it's account endpoint. Let me just copy the one. So we need the account endpoint. So account endpoint is this one. Account endpoint is this URL. So let me copy that URL there. Then you paste it there. Then just right after the endpoint, I just need to put semicolon, then the account key. So key is now the secret, like it's just like a password to authenticate you to that account. The account key is whatever key we have here. We can use the primary key or the secondary key. So let me copy this key and paste it on my env file. So with that, now we have our REST endpoint, the endpoint and the key. Let's go back now to the config file. So the config file will contain some variables to access, to connect us to the database. And the first thing I want just first of all to import is the .env library. So import all as a .env from the .env library. So .env that. Then with that, you need the config function from .env library. You can use this config function from .env library. Then just for it's a good practices to just to check some errors. So I want to use if condition here. If we have not, I want to make sure like if we have not set up the endpoint here, we want to display an error. So if process.env dot the file we have this string name here, the Cosmos DB string, this. Let me just copy the name to avoid some errors. So process.env, and that if it's not set, I just want to have to throw an error to make sure like everything is set up before we get started. So just throw an error, maybe Cosmos DB string is not defined on the env file. Then with that, I want to export 3 variables here. The first one is the DB connection string, which we are importing from, we are getting it from the .env. So with this, I want to export this Cosmos DB string with keyword export. The other one is the database we want to use from our the database we have created on our Cosmos DB. So export Cosmos DB database name, then the exact database name we have created on our data explorer, which is what? Let me copy the correct database. Just a minute. So this database, e-commerce database. So let me copy this name and the database name there. Then the container we want to use. So the container is just a table, so it's users. So export const container name. Let me use the same naming convention, container underscore name, which is we have created one, which is users. Now with these variables, we can now use them on our index.ts to connect to our database. So first thing, on our index, we need now to import the Cosmos SDK, the Cosmos client class that will enable us to connect to the database. Let me import the file, the library or the class. So import from our Cosmos SDK, we have this class name, which is a Cosmos client from Azure Cosmos SDK. Remember, we installed the library here. So let's go ahead. We have the client. Then we want also to import these variables here. We can see we have the export key one. So this variable can be used anywhere in our code. So let me also import the same variables there. So import the first is a Cosmos DB connection string. Then there were 3 variables. The other one is a database connection, so database name. Then the other one is a container name. And then I want to now to instantiate a new connection on this using the Cosmos client. And the way I do this, you just need to store the connection on a variable. You can call it client, then use the new keyword, new, then the Cosmos client. You'll be able to instantiate a new connection on the database. Then you need to pass this Cosmos DB. If you over it, you see it expect one argument. So the argument, it's the connection string. We should provide it. So under this, you pass the connection, database connection string, which is this. So let me pass this connection here, paste it there. Connection Cosmos take a minute, Cosmos DB connection string. And then if we get that connection, we can now be able to access the database on that connection. So the database, the const database, you can access it now from this, the new connection we have created here. So client, and then if you use dot, you can be able to get to see what the functions or the method you can get from the client connection you have created here. So what I want to access is the database. So the database, then also the database expects an argument, which is now the database ID. And the database ID is whatever name we given here. So let me pass now that database name there. So database name. With that, we also need the container. So const container container. It's under the database. So the database n dot container. Then we need to pass also the container ID, which is now whichever it's on our config.ts. So let me pass the container name. And with that, I think we are halfway done. And the next is just a function now to fire this to create a connection to our database. So I want just to use a normal async await function. So that's because we need to await some connection to the database so that we can do something. So let me stop the project here to avoid some more errors there. So I want to have an async function here. So async function, just to check the connection. So function name is check connection. Then the empty params, then the implementation of this function. So I want to use a try catch block to catch any errors arising when connecting to this database. At the try, I want to have return type of an object. So const an object, which is the database we are trying to access. And I want just to rename that to another name to avoid conflict with this database name here. So use the full colon to rename whatever the thing you have on the left to the right. So I can just say it's maybe DB information. So DB info. So whenever I not now be using this database, I'll be using the DB info. Then what I want to do is I want to await now. So wait, what am I awaiting? I'm awaiting this database. So awaiting database dot what? We have a read method on this database. So the read method is whatever I want to use to make sure like I'm getting a connection to this database. So this function just a function with optional params, our argument. So read, then if we get some information from this read method, that means we have been connected to that database. So I just want to console log a message there, which is what I can just display this message, this message here. So Control Alt G with this Control Alt L. So you can see now we want to display the info of that database, and also I just want to also to display the container name of whatever container we are using, which is now just the container. We are passing the container name from this. And the db info is whatever we are getting from the read function on this database. So if you have an error, you want to display the error on the catch block, this one here. So console.error failed to connect to the database. Then we want to display the actual error, whatever error we end. So with this, always when you have the function definition, you need to call the function to make sure it's fired when you run the project. So we have the function. So I can now go back to my terminal and rerun my project to check whether we'll get a connection to our database. So npm run dev. So with this, if our connection is good, we should be able to get the DB info. If we have errors, we'll be able to see this. So let's wait for the project to run. And I think we are getting whatever we wanted to get. So we have a bunch of information here to that is being displayed, and but we can summarize this by just returning. We say this is an object, so we have this. We can return the ID only, so .id, and we run that. We can only now get the database info, that just the ID, which is now the e-commerce database, and we are using the users container. So we are now sure like we have been now connected to the database and the container we want to use. So if there is any error, it will be catched and displayed here. Maybe something like if you maybe your connection string has an error, like if you try to change anything, and rerun the project, you'll be able to see some errors there with the try catch, the catch broke. So let me go back, and now we want to implement some CRUD operation. So CRUD, we say it's create, read, update, and delete functionality of any, whenever you're working with the database, we are working with the 5 operation. It's either creating, maybe posting data on that, or reading, writing something in that the database, or reading or getting some information from that database. And the first thing I just want to have, since it's a user's container, that means we need some we need an interface to describe whatever data we want on our users table or the container. So I just need to have a simple interface here, interface users. So this user, we only need some basic information, just an ID of type string, then maybe first name, type of string, then maybe an email. I don't want to make it complicated, so an email also of data type string. Now with this, I want to add a user on this database. We can do it on this Data Explorer, but I don't want to do, we can use this now and a new item, and you'll be able to create that using the Data Explorer. So I want to add that on VS Code here. So I want to have a function to add a user on our database. So and user function. We have this, I want to use async because we are waiting some processes to occur on somewhere, then we get the response. So we need the async and wait functionality. So async, then function, maybe and user. So and user, this user function expect param. So a user of JSON, then this user is of this interface here, user. So we want to make sure also our function is type safe, so user. Then open curly braces, and we can add the functionality to add a user in our database. So we want to store the whatever will be awaiting from the connection or from the database. So const, it always comes as an object. So const object, and we want to await what? Await our container. So we are adding an item on a container or on a table. So we want to await a container dot what? So we're adding an item. So you can see here we have all the methods we can get from this container. So we are adding items. So items dot what? On items, you can do what? You can do this, you can batch, mark, change, but I want this function dot create. So items dot create, then I want to pass whatever our function is getting as an argument. So I want to pass that data there, which is now just the interface or the object of the user we are creating. Then with that, I want to use maybe an if condition. So whatever you are getting here, you can just call it anything. So let me call it resource. Then if condition. So if there is this resource here, so the resource, we want to just console log the ID of that resource we have added on our database. So this resource, we want to console log the added user, the resource, but I don't want to display everything. I just want to display the ID only. And if there is an error, so else there is an error, I just want to console log just a message to say like the resource is undefined or something like that. So just a message there, console.log failed to add the user. Now we have this function. We can use it now to add some users on our database. So let me come down here, then call the function. Maybe or test the function. So with that, so add user. And user. So add user expect what? An object. So with this interface, the three values, the ID, first name, and email. So with this, I want to open the curly braces and now pass whatever the data I want to pass to that and user or the item I want to add. So I just want to add just my basic information for me. Like I want to be an ID one, a name. So it's first name. So it's first name. Then the email. So we have ID, the first name, and the email. Then we can now run our project again. npm run dev. So let's see whether our first user in our database will be created. So we get this response, added user resource one, that means our user was added. And we want to confirm that on our Azure Data Explorer, the account. So if you go over and maybe let's refresh this to see whether the user was created successfully. Just a minute for it to load. Under users container, then items, you can be able to see we have this ID here. That means we have created our first user in our database successfully. So which is ID1, which is Dennis at gmail.com, and also other some metadata of this row or document. So these are just for indexing purposes. We said the Cosmos DB, it indexes your data automatically. So this for the purpose of indexes and maybe for vector searching and kind of. So we have created our first user in our container. So that means we are done with that. Let's try another person here. So let me, to avoid some errors there while reloading while I'm typing, let me stop the project and then add maybe another user, Brian, then Brian at gmail.com. Then run the project again. We should now be able to create the second user in our database. So with that, we have created the second user in our database. Now we have this one, we have added ID number 2. So we want now to get all the users from the database and display them on our console. And how do we do that? So let me comment the function to create to one user to avoid infinite creating of this user on our database whenever we run this project. So here, the next function we want is maybe retrieving all the users from our database. Retrieving the users from the database or from the container. So it's just a simple function. So it's also an async function. Async function. function name is get users. It's as empty params, then the function. So the function, remember you are getting an object, so we need to store that object on a variable here. So the same, I can call them the resources or the users. So the resources, then what are we doing? We are awaiting the container. Remember, you're working now with the container. That's where you're creating, we are reading, we are updating. So we need now to await this, await the container dot what? The items. The items, whatever, what are we doing? So we want to read all items in our container. So read all function. Then after reading, we want to fetch all the items and store them on this resources function or object. So read all, then dot what? Fetch all function. So with this, we are able now to get all the users all on our container, which is the container which is users. And with that, I just want to console log the users there. So these users here, just console log the get user function, then the resources. So we are just console log in the object or the all users from an object. And we need to call now our function get users. Get users. With this now, let me run the project. Run there. So we expect 2 users from our project since we have added those 2 users, Dennis and Brian. So let's see whether we'll be able to get all the users from our database. Yes, you can see now our console log, we have an array of objects, which has now the first user, which is Dennis, and the second user, which is Brian. So ID2 and ID1. That means we have been able to read from the database. So the third one is update. So we want to update my name to a new name. Maybe I misspelled. My name is single N. So we can try to update this to a single N. And with that, it's just a simple function also to do that. Let's do this as fast as possible. Function to update. So the same way, so it's an async function. Async function. Maybe update user. Then this function has a param, so we need to pass the ID to uniquely identify each user. So we said the partition key is the user ID, so which now we are using to partition to make sure like each document has a unique identifier, which is ID. So this update user, we need to pass the user ID as a unique identifier. And this ID must be of type string. And the function, so the function, we want also to store the object from our await, from our promise. So const the resource, then we want to await the container. So container dot item. So we don't want to use items because we want to access one item. So you want to use this now function item. So we want to get one item, and this item accept what? So we want to pass a ID. So of this item we want to edit. So item, the ID, and we want to get that. So we want to read that item. So we want to pass the read method to make sure we are reading the item with this ID. Then after we have gotten the resource, so we can now use the resource now to update this. So come here down, the resource we are getting, then dot this resource, we have the 3 properties. Maybe we want now to change the first name. So the resource dot first name, we want now to pass the new name. So also the new name, we must pass it on as an argument here. Maybe the new name here, which is also a string. We want to assign now the first name with the new name here. So let's pass it there, the new name, and we want to await the replace. We want now to replace the new the old name with the new name. So we want to await the same container, the same item. So item, the ID, the user ID. And what do we want to do? We want to replace now the new name. So dot replace. So we have this function replace here. So replace, then what are we replacing? We are replacing this the resource here. So let me use now the resource there with this whatever we have assigned this. And now with that we can console log the ID and the new name we have on our database. So with that, we have the function, we get the resource first by passing the ID. We read the item. And we update the first name with the new name we are passing on our function. Then we await our container to replace the item with the provided ID, the new changes we have made. Then we want to just console that. Then I can call this now. So update user. So it expects 2 params, which is or the argument. So first one is ID. So I need to pass valid ID, which is ID1, then the name, whatever I want to update. So let me pass the name now. I can say maybe updated Dennis. So this is what we are updating. We are updating the first name and that's whatever we are passing there. Then let me now call my run my projects again. pnpm run dev. You can see before we do this, remember TypeScript, JavaScript, the code is compiled and run top to bottom. So we have this function. This function is being fired or being executed before we update this. So that's why you can be able to see here, we have not updated our first name because the function called before this. But now if I rerun the project again, let me comment this because you have already updated this. If you can see here, we have user one updated to updated Dennis. So if I comment this out and get this function, we are sure right now our users, the user ID number 1 was being updated successfully. And with that, you can be able to see now, confirm this. The ID number 1 was updated to the new name, which is updated Dennis. So with that, let me do now a delete function, just as quick as possible. You can see our time is not on our side. Then delete. So delete is so easy. We need now the same function to delete user. So we need to pass the ID of the user we want to delete. So async function delete user. this user, you need to pass the ID of whatever the user you want to delete. Then we want to await our container. So our container has this delete function, delete. We first need to get the item. So it's container item, then we pass the ID, user ID, then we have this dot delete function there, delete function. Then, oh, this is type string to avoid the TypeScript type checking errors. And I just want to display to console log the message there. Just a simple message, the user with ID1 was deleted. So let me now call the function, which is delete user, then the ID. So delete user with ID number 1. So let's wait for the project to run. The same way, because we have the get user function being initialized, you'll be able to see the two users. But since the delete user is at the bottom, it has executed, but you have not gotten the new record. So I can now call this function here down here, or maybe just comment this and wait for the project to rerun. I'll be able now to get the new updated users where we have deleted the first user. So we expect to have now only Brian on our database. So, and with that, I think we are done. Just a basic TypeScript CRAN operation using the Cosmos SDK. And I wish to stop at that point. And the floor is open for any question as we wind up and as we prepare for the next session, which is now next week. We now be going into more frameworks rather than just pure TypeScript. So next week, I will be diving more on building an API, so a full API of this type. We'll use Express, then the other week, Kevin will do Honor or a next API. Any question up to? Yeah. Any question, any feedback before we wind up? Hello, I need some feedback. Ama watu wamefruit kidogo kidogo. Thank you for appreciation, Michael and Paul and Cyrus.